Okay. So I think, Norm, if you'd like to kick things off and then we'll get going.
That's great. Thanks very much, Dawn. My name's Norm Buckley. I'm the principal investigator for the Chronic Pain Network, which is Canada's first national network supporting research into chronic pain. And it's funded under the Strategies for Patient-Oriented Research program at the Canadian Institutes for Health Research. This is the first of 3 webinars that our Patient Engagement Committee has created, and you'll hear from Janet Gunderson, Therese Lane, and Don Richards, among others, who have put together this webinar series and are all members of our Patient Engagement Committee. And our target audience is trainees, but you can be a trainee at pretty much any point in your career. And so we're interested in your feedback about this session. And please sign on for the other sessions. They're not 3 identical sessions being repeated. So we're going to start off now. Dawn, I will hand it over to you to start off with the agenda. But welcome, everyone, and hope you enjoy the series.
Thanks a lot, Norm. And maybe if I could just ask people to mute. There's a little bit of feedback, so if you're not speaking, we'd ask you to please mute yourself. So as Norm mentioned, my name is Don Richards. I'm part of the Patient Engagement Committee of the Chronic Pain Network, and I really help the group execute on their initiatives, some of which we're going to talk about today. I'm joined by Janet Gunderson, who lives in rural Saskatchewan, and Therese Lane, who lives in downtown Toronto, both individuals who live with chronic pain. And I'll just tee up the agenda to start us off here. Okay, so really today is an introduction to patient-oriented research and patient engagement. The idea is for it to be delivered by patient partners at the Chronic Pain Network. As Norm mentioned, this is part of a series, and we're just in the planning stages to be able to deliver approximately 1 a month for almost the next year or so. We're going to have Norm kick it off with a bit about the Chronic Pain Network. We're going to set the foundation with some definitions so that we're all on the same page as we continue throughout the webinar. Janet and Therese are really going to impress upon you why they feel patient engagement is important in research. We're going to talk a lot about practical information to hopefully help you engage patient partners in your work. We're going to also provide some helpful resources that we've been involved with developing at the Chronic Pain Network. We're going to take questions at the end, but we would encourage you to type questions in the chat box as we go. We're going to try and answer as many as we can during the call. And hey, if there's lots and lots of questions, I don't see why we can't get some answers to you after the fact as well. We are also recording the session, and we'll be putting these up, I believe, on CPN's YouTube channel so that we can make sure lots of people can see this. So Janet, I'm going to hand it over to you here.
We're going to start with a poll and ask a couple questions about your experience with working with patients. We have the next slide. First question is, have you heard of terms like patient-oriented research and patient engagement? If you could fill that out now. And the second question is, have you worked with patients as research partners? And the results will come up in just a moment. Do we have the results, or should we just carry on?
Yeah, I think, Kim, you need to close the poll to show the results.
So you've all heard of the term, which is good. And some of you have worked with patient partners and others haven't. Hopefully you get some pointers on this webinar of other ways to work with patient partners or a way to start working with patients, partners on patient-oriented research. And Norm is going to talk about the network.
Great. Thanks very much, Janet and Dawn and Therese and everyone else on the Patient Engagement Committee. So the Chronic Pain Network started in 2016. It's a 5-year program, so it's nearing the end of what we hope will be its first iteration. And it really is it's a truly national collaboration, and it includes patients, researchers, healthcare professionals, educators, industry, government policy advisors. We have some fairly lofty goals, as you can see. We want to increase access to care as well as speeding translation of research. And apart from myself, you'll see the other principal applicants there. If you're at all familiar with pain research, that is a who's who of pain research and pain advocacy in Canada. And next slide, please. Great. It's divided up into sort of several general areas. Part of it are the committees, and the committees both provide oversight and governance as well as generating some of the activity towards the goals that we set out in the original application. You can see all of these individual committees here: the Patient Engagement Committee, Training and Mentoring, Knowledge Translation, Patient-Oriented Research, the Registry Working Group, the Clinical Research Network, and the Indigenous Health Research Advisory Group. In all of these committees, they are co-chaired by a patient partner and either one of the principal or co-applicants. Just back up for a sec, please. Although I appreciate that I may not be going enough for everyone. So these are the committees that, as I say, provide governance. Patients are integrated into the governance of the network. In addition, we fund about 26 individual research projects spread across the country, and each one of these projects has been linked up with a patient to work with the principal investigator and the team. As with everything else, we've had varying degrees of integration and success with that, but it is one of the principles of the network. Next slide, please. And just before I pass this back to Dawn and the rest of the team, one of the things which I think everyone, if you have not heard about it, it's worth going to the website at the bottom, painpluscpn.ca. This is one of the things that we created as part of the knowledge translation strategy for the network. It's what can loosely be described as a literature surveillance and notification service. There's about 120 journals, I think, that are now surveyed by the team on a regular basis, and articles are circulated and brought to your attention. One of the big advantages that I've noticed myself is that they frequently come from journals that you might not normally see, and so they keep you exposed to a range of literature. But it's a really worthwhile service for everyone. But I think particularly if you're a trainee or a new early trainee in the business of pain research, this will keep you abreast of what's happening in the field. Next slide, because I think we're now passing over to the rest of the team. So thanks very much. And that's a little bit of background, and we have a website also that you can go to get more detail about the network itself.
Awesome. Thanks, Norm. So now we're going to get into really the heart of the discussion. As I mentioned at the start, the idea here is for all of us to get on the same page with respect to CIHR's definitions of patient-oriented research, patient engagement, and some principles. And so first of all, I'm going to ask Janet to take on this slide for us.
This is CIHR's definition of a patient. You can see it's a very broad definition. It doesn't just include the person with the health issues. It can include caregivers such as parents or caregivers of people with Alzheimer's. It can also include family and friends. So you could have somebody who doesn't actually have whatever you're studying on your team, but they have experience with dealing with it.
And Therese, is there anything you'd like to add to this definition as well?
Yes, I think that chronic illness is a family disease. So whatever I go through, ultimately my husband goes through, and vice versa. And I think that's the unique experience that patient partners can bring to research.
Thanks, Therese. Okay, next we're going to move on to this concept of patient-oriented research. And these are kind of the 4 things that CIHR defines as being part of patient-oriented research. So I'll let you read the slide, but I'm going to ask Janet if I know she's got an example that she'd like to bring about patient-oriented research.
A number of years ago, there was a large survey that was done in collaboration with a number of rheumatologists and a number of patients. And this survey went all across Canada. There was quite a big uptake on it. And they were looking to see what the priorities were that people had, you know, what was their first problem with RA, what was their second. The first one, of course, came back as pain. That was no surprise to the doctors, but they were very surprised to find out that fatigue was second on their list. So after that, they started to do some research on fatigue and rheumatoid arthritis. And that information came directly from the patients from that survey.
Thanks, Janet. So I guess one way to look at this is you know, patients bringing their lived experience and what they know to be unmet needs within their healthcare kind of to the surface so that we can make sure that people can research it and help us deal with what we experience day to day. Okay, so I think maybe the part to impress upon people here is that this is patient-oriented research is kind of a new partnership in Canadian health research. And Therese, I'm going to ask you to layer your thoughts onto this slide.
Yes, because this is a new type of collaboration in research, whereby researchers who are used to only working with other researchers, caregivers with other caregivers, etc. This is bringing the above groups out of their comfort zones to work collaboratively as knowledge users in the hope of a far better outcome in research.
Thanks, Therese. And that takes us to the next slide, which is patient engagement in patient-oriented research. And again, this is courtesy of CIHR. And, you know, this includes meaningful and active collaboration in governance setting, in priority setting, in doing the actual research, and in knowledge translation. So Therese, I know you've got some ideas around this slide that you'd like to share.
Yes, another way to think about patient engagement is to think about the patients as a proactive partner rather than participating in research that is for them or about them. In fact, the Patient Engagement Committee is a good example of this, and later on we will elaborate on some of the projects that we did as a committee.
Okay, so it's kind of like flipping the thinking a bit. I think most people think of patients as being a resource to participate in their research, and as Therese mentioned, this is a different way to think about patients as collaborators. Okay, so next up in setting the foundation here, these are the 4 guiding principles of patient engagement that CIHR defines as part of their patient engagement framework. So they range from inclusiveness, support, mutual respect, and co-build. And again, you can look at some of the points under each of those guiding principles. Janet is really passionate about a principle that kind of underlies all of these. So Janet.
In any relationship, I think communication is the key to working together as partners. The communication does not have to be in person, although sometimes that's nice. It could be via Zoom meeting or a WebEx meeting. I know some universities don't use WebEx. Even an email to keep the patient partner informed of what's happening is very supportive and keeps them part of the team. And of course, they can ask questions via email back. So like any relationship, communication. That's what I stress.
Thanks, Janet. And what about you, Therese? Anything you would like to highlight on this slide?
Yes, I think the mutual respect is really important. This is acknowledgement of what each party can bring to the research. One, the researcher, who is a trained professional with sometimes years of learned experience, and two, the patient partner, who from the University of Life brings a unique lived experience of living with, in this case, chronic pain. And I think establishing these two perspectives right from the onset, the two can go on to form a very interesting and valuable partnership.
Thanks, Therese. I like the University of Life. It's given me some hard lessons sometimes. Thanks. Okay, next up, some of you I think have probably seen this. This is what's called the patient engagement spectrum. And well, it's the public participation spectrum. In this case, we're using it to refer to levels of patient engagement. It has been developed by the International Association for Public Participation. And along the left-hand side here, it explains each of these levels of engagement that you see at the top that kind of go from, Janet's going to talk to you about this, but they go from you know, a lesser level of engagement to a really high level of engagement. And on the left-hand side, you'll see that there's an explanation as to what the goal is under each of these levels of engagement and what the effective promise is to your partners, so your patient partners that you're working with. So I'm going to ask, Janet has lots of experience with this spectrum. Going to ask her to talk about her experiences with the spectrum, and then I'll just ask Therese to add some of her own examples to this. So Janet?
I've reviewed patient-oriented research grants for the Saskatchewan Centre for Patient-Oriented Research and the Canadian Institute of Health Research. And one of the things we're looking for is to get higher up on the spectrum. If you're just informing someone, you're really not working with them. If you consult them like a focus group, it's not really totally patient-oriented research. You've included them a little bit. So if you involve them or collaborate with them, you've worked much more closely. The word empower is a little tricky. I don't take that as a patient has the last word in whatever outcome might be, but they would be part of it. So I wouldn't get hung up on the word empower, but you want to get to the high end to truly work with a patient partner.
Thanks, Janet. And Therese?
Well, I had different experiences when I was a patient partner. The first time was with a basic scientist, and it was, we met and neither one of us knew what we were to do, but we kind of figured it out. We kind of, I told him a little bit of my life and, you know, my passions, and he told, and we discussed, you know, things like how much time I could spend, how much time I could give. And one thing he did was he said that I could come anytime to the lab, and as long as I gave notice. And what he did was that each time I came, he set up a slide with a gene on it so I could look. And I think the greatest part of that was seeing the students working towards one common thing. And I think it was so exciting for me to go there. When I first went there, they were using animal genes, and probably the last time I went there, they were using a human gene. So well, we both knew this. one thing that was disappointing about it was that the project had already started, and I think that's important to start at the beginning. But and it was a long, it was going to be years, you know. This in his life, he didn't see that it was going to get sorted in his lifetime. So, but it was a great learning experience for me. And on the other part of the spectrum, I was involved right from the beginning. I went to the first meeting, and each step of the way I was informed and I was a part of, and I knew exactly what I was doing and what they were doing, and it was a great experience for me. So there's two ends of the spectrum.
And I guess your one experience with the basic science group, Therese, sometimes that's a little bit harder to engage patient partners, but it sounded like you both kind of acknowledged that, and you tried to work through it as best you could.
Yes, yeah. And we did discuss things, you know, like if I was ill and I couldn't come that day, was that going to be okay, or is it going to be problematic, and those kind of things that need to be brought up. So it was one of learning to speak to and communicate with the researcher, and it was a good learning experience for me.
Okay. So experiences all across the spectrum, which is important for people to hear about and see how those play out too. So on we go to the next section, which is really about Therese and Janet helping you understand why they feel that their engagement as patient partners is so important in the work that happens. So Janet and Therese and I spent some time kind of brainstorming across these three sort of themes. And one is that Janet's already talked about this, that things that maybe don't seem important to researchers or physicians can sometimes be really important to patients. They're going to talk about putting a face to what you're studying and helping out with knowledge translation. So I'm going to start with you, Janet, and ask you to talk about some examples with respect to this slide.
This is actually a very recent example in Saskatchewan where they had a walking program going, and some people were using Nordic walking sticks and some people weren't. And I'm not sure if it was a group of them, but anyway, they got together and decided they wanted to know if these Nordic walking sticks were beneficial. So they literally knocked on the researcher's door and said, could we study this? And there was a grant put in and it was funded. And of course, the patients were part of that grant. There was a working group of patients, and that's being studied right now. So that shows where patients come in at the beginning. Probably the idea of studying that would not have come from the researcher. So they're involved right through the grant now. And they will also probably be involved in knowledge translation and spreading the results out to future walking groups.
And Janet, you've also spoken of the example already about fatigue being highlighted by people who live with arthritis. That's something that many researchers and physicians didn't consider before that was really brought to their attention too.
No, because they don't live with the condition. They don't really understand how high up on the priority list that is or how big a problem it is. And so by working with patients, you're building relationships with them. And they can have things like help with knowledge translation, help with the lay summary, even help with what outcomes you might be studying.
Thanks, Janet. Therese, is there anything you'd like to add that's on the slide?
Yes, I think it's putting a face to the research because we can provide experiences and insights that people who don't live with pain wouldn't really know about. So I guess it's like keeping the research real.
One of the
You're
things
good with this.
Yeah. Patients can help with lots of things. Therese and I are working with a group out of McMaster helping with lay summaries. And we were sat in on their lecture about them, and now we're reviewing them. And I've got to say, they've done a pretty good job.
Okay, awesome. Anything else?
I just want to say that one thing you could do with your patient partner is include them in applying for the initial grant. Actually, I was interviewed on a video that was submitted when the Chronic Pain Network was seeking funding. So that worked out well.
Yeah. I remember that. Thanks, Therese.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so that's a good seg into practical information on engaging with patient partners. So that's where we're headed next. So here's some advice, and Janet, over to you.
We're asking people to work with patient partners, but I'm sure some of you are wondering how and where you find the patient partners. If you're working with pain, the Chronic Pain Network is a logical place to start. Most provinces have a support unit, patient-oriented research support unit, so you could contact them and they would have a list of patients and even know maybe what topics they're interested in. Patient organizations or health charities like the Arthritis Society, Canadian Arthritis Patient Alliance, or the Lung Association would again know patients that are interested in doing this sort of thing. We have an example of somebody in the Chronic Pain Network who checked with the local support group and talked to them about what they wanted researched and is actually working with that support group now. Other clinicians and researchers also sometimes know where to find patients. And sometimes when you're working with a patient, the patient may step back for part of it. I've done a systematic review and I didn't want to be involved in the part of analyzing the statistics. I can understand the statistics when they're done, but it's just not my thing. So I didn't do that one part, but I was involved from the beginning and involved at the end. I can understand them and help with the KT. So there may be times where the patient chooses not to be involved or it's not appropriate. Those are sort of things that you discuss with them ahead of time.
And Therese, I know that you fell into being a patient partner in an interesting way. Where did you meet Jennifer Stinson, Therese?
Oh, at the gym. Yes.
Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah. So, yeah.
You just struck up a conversation at the gym because you're both morning people, and from there it took off, Therese?
Yeah. I just happened to mention one day to Jennifer while after we'd worked out and getting ready to leave and everything that I had pain, and the rest is history. She had me signed up everywhere. Yeah.
And I know you miss those gym days.
Oh gosh, I do. I was just telling Jennifer about it today, actually. Yeah, we missed the routine of it, and yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move on to general advice on engaging patient partners. And again, these are some items that Therese and Janet and I brainstormed. We know Janet's super passionate about communication. She's going to talk a bit about that here. But we've also got some points here for you with respect to collaboration, with respect to being really clear on roles and responsibilities, that patients aren't researchers and shouldn't be expected to be. And Therese and Janet have talked a little bit about this being treated like any other relationship in your life. And please don't feel like you need to be an expert on patient engagement right away. And again, Therese and Janet have talked a little bit about that, about like being honest where you are, about figuring things out together as a team. So Janet, I'm going to pass it off to you to talk a bit more about communication here.
I, of course, stress like Dawn and Therese that you get the patients involved at the beginning. You'd have to sit down and obviously communicate, maybe negotiate, in sort of a loose term, what the roles will be, what your expectations for the patient will be. How often will you meet? Is there any particular things you want the patients to respond to, the patient partners? I also suggest always to have at least 2 patient partners because sometimes one will drop out. And I also, when I review grants, suggest the same thing. I think two or more is better. And so they need to know their expectations, the timeline of how long research will be. I think from another project I did in Saskatchewan, I found out that most patients didn't realize how long research took. And there's sometimes, 2 or 3 months where not much appears to be happening, where actually there's lots happening, but not between the researcher and the patient at that point in time. Just an email telling them what stage you're at helps.
Thanks, Janet. Therese, is there anything you'd like to add here?
Yeah, I just want to stress about that no one is an expert on patient engagement yet. And it's okay to say, I don't know, because it's new to everyone. And I think being mindful of each other's needs and remembering that a lot of things that the patient partner may share during the research is very personal experiences. And I think that you also let your patient partner know that it's okay to just not be up to meeting that day. And a lot of the time our illness is very unpredictable, and no one feels more guilty than us when we can't do something. So being aware of things like that.
Okay, and I think you both had some really nice points here about, Janet, like you talked a bit about things being a bit of a negotiation. I think that theme kind of runs through yours too, Therese, that like sometimes you can't make it, sometimes you can. You also talked, Therese, earlier about your work with the basic scientist and, you guys figuring it out together in terms of how to engage with each other. So I just want to leave some of those points with people that there's also, there's lots of good guidance, but maybe not necessarily a recipe, so to speak. And so, be open to having discussions with your patient partner about what works for them, doesn't work for them, all those kinds of things. Okay, so next we're going to move on to resources. So the three of us being involved in the Chronic Pain Network's Patient Engagement Committee, part of what we've done is tried to build some really practical resources for people in our community to use. And I think, Therese, are you going to tee up this slide for us?
Yeah. I'm going to. This is probably one of the first things that we did as on the patient engagement committee, and it was roles for coming up with roles for patient partners in your projects, and things like reviewing and commenting on consent forms, planning for ways to share your research results and more. Like Janet mentioned, that it doesn't have to be face-to-face, it can be Zoom or this is a good resource. You can find this on the CPN website.
Thanks, Therese. And like Therese said, we brainstormed, in case you're having a bit of a blank about how patients might be involved in your project, there's lots of at least starting points for you to consider. And so on to the next one. Janet?
This is another resource that the Patient Engagement Committee came up with. And the nice thing about being on the governance committees is when we ask or suggest that there's a need for tips for research conversations, a committee struck and the documents are done. So it's really nice being part of the governance too, which is also part of patient engagement. But I would say, like Therese says, don't be afraid to tell them that you don't know totally how to work with patients, because we don't know either. Use ordinary language. I would just have a regular conversation, not a lecture. Try and avoid jargon and acronyms. You may have to teach them some terms. They may know more than you think if they've lived with the condition. So it's fine to just have a regular conversation. I'd also personally suggest a first name basis. It's not a doctor-patient relationship.
So throw away titles at the door, Janet, and come to the table as people.
I agree.
Cool. Okay, and the next couple of resources I will talk about a little bit. So one of these resources that our committee has also been a part of the creation of is from a number of the SPORE chronic disease networks with respect to recommendations on patient engagement compensation. So just to be clear, within our network, we ensure that we can cover the expenses of our patient partners to be involved, but compensation is on top of covering expenses and is really about if patient partners wish to receive compensation, it is about providing compensation for their skill, time, and expertise. And so this particular document just helps you think about some of those considerations around compensation. There can be implications for your patient partners with respect to accepting compensation. And so some of those things are laid out, along with if you work at an institution, maybe some of the logistics associated with compensation. And people always get, are not really sure about rates and numbers to consider. So amongst the number of the SPORE chronic disease networks, we've shared some of those specific rates with respect to hourly rates, being involved in long-term engagements, et cetera. So that's one resource for you. And then lastly, another resource for you is hot off the press. It's just a month old. Again, this was from start to end conceived by the Patient Engagement Committee at the Chronic Pain Network. And it is with respect to the topics of authorship and acknowledgement in patient-oriented research. So a working group was struck from the Patient Engagement Committee, and Therese was a part of that group. And what we did was we developed a manuscript outline. We wrote a manuscript using Google Docs. For a lot of the patient partners who were part of the exercise, this was a new thing for them. And as we went along and learned, for example, we developed some definitions about the publishing process for patient partners, as well as a big diagram of what happens in the publishing process. We submitted our manuscript, we got it back with lots of markups, and so the working group went through the exercise of responding to the reviewers and resubmitting. And again, that was a new experience for many patient partners. They didn't know necessarily that that's how things happened. And then this was published. So this is open access and it's on our website. And Therese, is there anything you wanted to share about your experience of being on this working group?
Yes, I think one of the things I learned was that we weren't rejected. I felt that it was such a slight that they sent it back. But it wasn't, it wasn't the end of the world. It was sorted out, and everything continued the way it had been right from the start. We were all involved in looking at it again and resubmitting it, and in days it was published. So that was a great experience for me. All was not lost.
It's an interesting experience when you haven't been through it, right, Therese? Like I remember when the comments came back and people thought, oh, those are a lot of comments. But at the end of the day, we came up with a better paper.
Yeah. I did ask, I said, is this harsh? And Norm assured me it wasn't harsh.
Okay, so that's another resource for people.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Therese.
Okay,
and I think, Therese, you're going to lead us through another poll. We've come to the end of the kind of presentation portion here, so we're going to see if you've learned anything. So I'm going to ask Kim to bring up the poll for Therese to lead.
Okay, so the first question is, do you feel you understand more about patient-oriented research and patient engagement than when we started the webinar? And 2, can you now see how working with patient partners could benefit your research? Is it all?
I think Kim just needs to close the survey so we can see the results,
okay.
but she'll be able to see how many people have participated too, so.
Okay.
They're still coming in, so I don't want to stop it too early.
Okay.
No problem.
We're close to the number that answered the first one.
Okay. Thanks, Kim.
Kind of hanging there. Okay, we might, this might be the end of responses here.
There we go.
Okay, you feel you. Oh, okay. So the benefits are 100%.
Good job, Janet and Therese.
Yeah. Yeah.
You made a convincing argument.
Let's hope they find it useful when they work with them.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. Thanks, Kim. So we're happy to take any questions that people have. Like I said, we're happy for you to put things in the chat box, or if people want to come off mute, that's okay as well. Any questions for Janet, Therese? Maybe I'll start things and ask a question, Janet. Janet, can you let people know, we know how Therese became involved. She serendipitously met somebody at the gym. Janet, when and how did you become involved as a patient partner?
Years ago, the Arthritis Society was actually kind of ahead of the game on this, and I became involved with a group called the Canadian Arthritis Network, which is a network centers of excellence. And they had a patient or a consumer advisory council, which is just a different term for patient. And that's how I started working with research and started reviewing grants. Then it just kind of snowballed, because then I became a patient partner with the Saskatchewan Centre for Patient-Oriented Research and with the Chronic Pain Network. So one thing kind of led to another. It wasn't something I planned, but I've stuck with it because I find it very beneficial, and I do believe in the process.
And Janet and Therese, do you often, stay engaged with your researcher partners throughout the years? And do they update you from time to time, even after projects are done, as to what came out of them?
Yes, there's some of that. I actually got an email today because I was on a call reviewing grants with the Arthritis Society yesterday, and it was with somebody I collaborated with. So she touched base today. So it was kind of nice. And she emailed about how she was doing and what it was like working at home with a 2-year-old during the pandemic, that kind of thing. So it isn't all totally research based. Yeah.
You're just getting to, you stay in touch with someone as an individual, not just as a researcher per se, right?
Yes.
Yeah. What about you, Therese? I know you're involved in lots of things now.
Yes. Well, I haven't heard, I have to initiate things with the basic scientist, but he was very generous with his knowledge. It's just the reaching out. Anytime I had to do that, so I haven't done that for a while. But the other projects that I've been on, I have kept in touch and seen how it's put into place, and it's nice to see these things unfold. I never get the researchers saying to me that if we don't include patients in our research, we get it wrong. And that's always stuck with me. And this person has been using patient partners before you know, it really came out into the, you know, a thing. But that's always stuck with me.
Awesome. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
We have a question from Carly. So she says, thanks for the presentation. She asks, as a patient partner, do you have a preference to working with more than one patient partner on a project, like a patient partner team, or do you prefer to be the sole patient partner working on a team? And do you have any thoughts on how many patient partners should be on a project?
I personally have, I think there should be 2, because I'm on a kind of a very detailed project in Saskatchewan where one did back out, so I'm now the only patient. But there are certain types of research where you may have a patient family advisory council where there's more than 2 people. It depends on what the research is and what type of project it is. So I don't think there's one answer for that. But personally, I mean, I've been on a project where I'm the only one, but I think it's better for the researcher to have 2, just in case something happens, one gets ill or drops out. But sometimes there are projects where there's, you know, there's 4 or 5 or 8 patients, depending on the type of research.
Do you have thoughts about that, Therese?
Yes, I was on a consensus meeting actually with Carly, and I was glad that she was there because I was so nervous, and it was all new to me, and I think having Carly there eased my fears. So I think it's a good idea. For me, it was anyway. I opened up afterwards, and then you couldn't shut me up. But
and have you ever felt, as the only patient partner, is there a different kind of pressure, for example, to represent like more than your own experience, and is that difficult, or can you talk a bit about that?
As the only patient partner, you're representing patients in general, not yourself, is the way I see it. And I definitely feel that I shouldn't miss a meeting, and we have meetings sometimes twice a month. So, you know, I literally try and plan my life around them because I don't feel I should miss a meeting if I'm the only patient on that team. And it was set up with more than one. It's just unfortunate what happened. So it was set up correctly, but life gets in the way sometimes. So the other's a little bit of pressure, but I also feel very listened to. And that's why I enjoy working with them.
That's kind of a nice bonus to hear that, Janet. That's good.
It is. It's a very good experience.
How about you, Therese?
Yeah,
anything else to add there?
Yeah, I think I kind of felt, I don't know, validated, I guess, when I would go to the lab and, you know, things were put on for me there, like slides were put on, and I thought that was really special. Yeah.
Cool. And there's a comment from Trudy. Thanks, Trudy. She's a patient partner, and she said she's presently the only patient on a research project that feels like it puts a lot of pressure on her. So another of those experiences, which is good to bring to people. Norm has asked if there are any basic science-focused research trainees. Feel free to add to the chat box about how you view the involvement of patients in your work. From Chris, she said, thanks for the interesting presentation. There don't appear to be any patient partner opportunities on the CPN right now. Are there any other sites you'd recommend for patient partners looking to be involved in pain research? I'm a patient partner involved in the development of healthcare standards and interested in pain research. So that's a good question. So just so that you know, Chris, the Chronic Pain Network is in its last year of funding right now, which probably is indicative of why we don't have a lot of open opportunities for patient partners in our work. I think you could reach out to the SPORE support units. I'm not sure which province you're in, but they may have some opportunities. Or you could reach out to CPN.
Yeah.
I'll just finish, then you could say it, Therese.
Okay. All right.
Or you could reach out to CPN and we could probably connect you with maybe some of the others that are out there. Therese, did you want to say something?
Yes, the clinical trials of Ontario. That's a good site to go to. It's easy to navigate, and there's opportunities there. Maybe.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. This is from Rochelle. Great presentation, very engaging. You mentioned that we must engage patients as early as possible. But what if you're on a project that's already going on? Can we still add patient partners into those later stages? I know both of you have had experience there.
I think it can be done. It's just a little harder because they haven't been there to sort of like help design the project, but you can certainly catch them up to where you are and again, negotiate the role and so on, but it has been done. And Therese and I have both done it.
Yeah.
Okay. This is from Natalie, who says, great presentation. This may be a question more on the research side, but are there any resources for how to include patient partners when writing your project's research ethics board submission? Especially if you're a student or postdoc in a lab where this hasn't previously been done. Yeah, that's a good question. And I think, Natalie, if I'm reading that correctly, you're talking about including patient partners as collaborators versus as participants. I hope I have that right. Yes, I have that right. Janet or Therese, do you have any advice there? Otherwise, I'm happy to add some.
I would think most universities should be used to it. I know I've seen the ethics application on a project before it went in and, you know, the results. So I think that they're mostly used to it now. I mean, you'd have to state the role of the patient and what patient partner and what they'll be doing or not doing sometimes, but I think they're used to it.
Therese, do you have any comments here?
No, I really don't know.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. I know that also CHR has a standing ethics group that had put together at least a draft guidance around things to consider here. And Natalie, I'm happy to provide you with my email and I can dig up where that's at right now. I know they haven't published their official guidance, but they had some really good guidance around it at one point. So I'll put my email in there for you and you can contact me. Larry from the BC Sports Support Unit has also indicated that they've got a new website for patient partner opportunities. So you can check out the chat box for that. And I think we've just got a few minutes to go. Janet has reminded me that the Patient Engagement Committee at the Chronic Pain Network is in the process of working with trainees to put together a survey on kind of perspectives, challenges, barriers related to patient engagement and research. Janet, did you want to say something about that, or do you want me to add about that?
You can go ahead, or Kyle can.
Kyle, are you still here? And happy to have you come off mute if you'd like to talk a little bit about the survey and put out a teaser for people.
Sure, if you can hear me, okay?
Yep, we can, Kyle.
Yeah, so we're in the process right now of creating a survey that will be coming out probably in the fall to understand trainees' experiences with patient engagement and also what they're looking for in terms of resources or recommendations. So yeah, more to come on that in the fall.
Thanks, Kyle. Okay, we've had great discussion here. Janet and Therese, are there maybe in the next few minutes I can add you to kind of sum things up? If you had to give the trainees who are on the call a bit of a nudge around patient engagement? Like, what kind of words of encouragement would, or advice would you provide them about, you know, starting to engage patients in their work?
I know it's working out of your comfort zone, but it's also kind of out of the comfort zone for the patient too, if that helps. So you're learning together, and there's certainly nothing wrong with saying, I don't know, or should we do this or that? I think usually it's a very rewarding process for both the patients and the researchers.
So you're saying go for it, you'll learn
Yep.
as you go. It's exciting, it's fun.
And this is actually happening in the United States and the UK and probably other places I'm not aware of too. It's really becoming quite common.
Okay, thanks, Janet. What about you, Therese? Any kind of words of encouragement?
I would just say go for it. Definitely, it'll be an exciting perspective, I guess. Working together, figuring things out together, and I think that patient partners are very passionate about it. They're willing to help, and I think that that would be great for to work with. I think go for it, definitely. Step out of your comfort zone.
They are a passionate group.
Yeah. Yeah.
And very willing to learn too.
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, ladies, for all of the work that you put into the session. Super appreciated. We'd like to thank everyone who's attended today. As we mentioned, the webinar is being recorded and will be posted shortly. And our next webinar, I believe, is going to be on August 20th, but we will be, promoting it over social media. It will be on our website. It will be hosted by 2 of our patient partners, and it will be a case study of patient engagement in clinical research. And as I mentioned, we're just in the process of scheduling out the webinars for the coming year. So we really look forward to continued conversations with you about this. And just want to thank everyone for their time today and for all of the amazing questions that you asked too. It's great to have such good engagement. So on behalf of the Chronic Pain Network, thanks very much everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.